Thank you so much for having me. I'm Chris Dyer. I have a brand new book coming out at the end of the month. If you're in the States, if you're anywhere else in the world, you can grab it right now. But we're going to talk about some of the things that are in the new book because I think it's probably the most up to date, the freshest stuff I have to talk about. And I thought you all might be the first to get to hear it, to see it, to know it. I'm going to make sure I'm going to click the right button here. There we go. So the first thing I want to do is ask you all a very simple question. It's a simple question with kind of a deep thought. And that is, what if tonight, you go right when you go to bed, we're going to roll some dice and we are going to randomly decide everything about you all over again. Maybe what your gender is, your sexual preference, your race, your religious preference, your upbringing, whether you had a traditional family or a non-traditional family. I mean, just like everything, right? We're going to keep rolling the dice and completely create a random new you. Great. You go to bed, you wake up, new you, and you go to work. Does your workplace still work for you? Is it still a great place to work for you? Is it still somewhere you want to be now that you are not you as you were right before you went to bed? Now, I ask this question often, and I will sometimes see people really squirm in the audience because they know maybe their work works for them right now, but if they were somehow different, if they were not the same person, it may not work for everybody. And that is what we need to start to think about with culture, with creating amazing workplaces, is that we need this workplace to work for everybody. And so sometimes designing things for the minority can end up making it better for the majority. Sometimes when we take time to make sure we're not doing certain things that might create the wrong kind of space or the wrong kind of outcomes, we can make sure that our culture goes to the next level. Whoops, I went a little too fast. So my original book and now the second edition really focuses on these 7 pillars. And these are the 7 pillars of great culture. I spent many, many years researching, working with companies, interviewing hundreds and hundreds of top executives, both privately and on my a radio show that I had for many years. And what I discovered was that there are these 7 pillars of amazing company culture. You can have a few of them and be okay. There are certainly things you can do to have a decent culture. But if you want to have a great culture, you got to be transparent. And we just heard that a second ago from Dan. We have to have a positivity, a positive sort of leadership approach. We have to be really good at measurement. We have to be good at listening. We have to focus on what makes us unique. We have to have incredible recognition programs, and we have to deal with mistakes properly. And if we do all of those things, we'll have a great company. Now, I'm not going to talk about all 7 today. What I am going to talk about is a few of these pillars and some of the brand new case studies, some of the brand new data, and the brand new things that I added to my new book that I think are the most exciting. So I'm kind of going to give you the best stuff for free right now. So the first thing I did is I went in and studied and did some work with VaynerMedia. Now, you may know Gary Vaynerchuk, otherwise known as Gary V. He's a pretty popular guy. He's really knows how to get attention. He's done amazing for himself, and he's got this company called VaynerMedia. And he is probably the most people-focused, people-first CEO that I have ever seen. I mean, he lives it, he breathes it. His ultimate goal is to one day own the Jets. We'll see if that happens, but he has done remarkable for himself by putting his people first and making his company and his companies, he's got more than one, really a people first company. Now, I worked with his chief heart officer, Claude Silver. She's a remarkable person. If you don't know who she is, I highly suggest you check her out. And we really tried to focus on what made them special. Where was it inside of those 7 pillars where they were really, really good. And we figured out that they were great at that positive leadership, right? They focused on what was good. They focused on what, where we could do better by first studying what's going well, seeing what people are really doing, and focusing on how do we perpetuate and grow and think about really exploding those things that are going well. We're not running around the office pointing out mistakes and talking about what's going wrong. We're talking about what's going right as our first inclination. And that's the positivity pillar. And then even looking at data and saying, well, in this sea of all the stuff going on, is there somewhere that's, things are going really well that we maybe didn't expect? And how do we go back and do that? Now, one thing that Claude really talked about in this case study that I put in my book was that they felt like where they were stumbling, or where leaders tend to stumble, is on the design part of positivity. So positive leadership comes from this philosophy, or this psychological school of thought called appreciative inquiry. And what we do when we want to get better, when we want to have an amazing company or an amazing product or service, is we have to first discover. We start with discovery about what might be possible. Then we dream about how to do it. And then we have to actually design it. And then we have to actually implement with destiny, real concrete things to do something. And it is the design part that kills us. It's the design part where people stumble. And that's where the leaders typically need the most help. Because we can daydream all day about how to do something awesome, but to really start to design it before we start to put those actionable things in place, it's where we struggle. It's really where we struggle. So we really looked at what made them successful and where were they really doing well. And this may come as a surprise to you, but it didn't to me, because we had seen this before, but it's a really great reminder. And it was that the middle matters. And so what do I mean by that? The middle is that group of people in the middle of your organization that they're not the low performers. They're not your high performers. I call them our Jedis in the book. They're not the people who are killing it, A players. You just got to leave them alone, support them, and leave them alone. They're going to go do their stuff. It's everybody else in the middle. It's that main group. I sometimes used to call them the flip phone crowd. Back in the old days, for anybody who ever had an original cell phone, it was we had these big bricks, and then we had flip phones. That was the next cool thing. And after flip phones came the iPhone and the Androids and all of those, the smartphones. It was a real struggle to get a certain group of people to give up their flip phones, to finally migrate over to a smartphone. They were going to hold on to, there were people that held on to that thing until the buttons fell off and it just wouldn't work anymore. And they really represented a certain group of people who are resistant to change. They don't want to do new things. They don't want to, try new things. They just want things to be how they are. And it ultimately, when we want to impact change, we want to do something awesome with our companies, it's them that we have to motivate and help understand to get them on board to moving forward. Because when they finally move, when they stop being an anchor to your change management initiatives, when they start being a part of the momentum, that's when really great things happen. And that's when we have this incredible positive impact and outcome for our organization. So the middle matters. And so Claude really talked about how they spend a lot of time really giving that support, empathy. They really listen, and they spend a lot of time trying to help that group be successful. So the next time you're really thinking about change, thinking about how to do something different, maybe it's just getting people to sign up for their comp plans or whatever it is you need them to do. Focus on that group. The ones that move a little slower, that are a little bit more high steady, that don't like a lot of change, that take a while to kind of migrate over to things. Find out what they're scared about. Find out what's keeping them back. Talk to them, empathize with them, listen, make sure that you are delivering on solutions for them, because man, as soon as they start going, everything starts happening. There is this huge momentum in the organization. The next pillar that I wanted to kind of spend some time on was measurement. And we got to spend, or I got to spend some good time with Brady Pyle. He's the former Deputy Chief Human Resources Officer with NASA. Now, when I worked with him, he was at NASA. He's now since left, but that's why I put former. But he spent a very long time with NASA and really worked with them to do some amazing things. So when we measure what matters, when what and what we focus on will grow, right? So if what we really are focused on, what we're looking at, what we're measuring, that can get better. That can, and so for thinking about positive things, we're measuring positive things, and we're really focusing on those things, they can grow. For focusing on negative things, I notice those tend to grow as well. We don't have that maybe outcome we expected. One of the big things that surprised me when I got into work with them was that they have 18,000 employees and only 100 of them are astronauts. That's quite a big difference into maybe what you might think about for NASA as far as who's over there and what they're doing. And they do have a lot of engineers and scientists and technical people, but still a really vast group of support staff and people that might reflect the what you might think about inside of your organization. So they really do mirror a normal organization in a lot of ways. So the way in which they really exemplified the measurement pillar and what had me put them in as a new case study into the book to really show everyone what we mean by how to measure was this. They really looked at big data to get big results. So they have there's a federal government annual survey that goes out to every federal employee. And they looked at all of that data for 18,000 people. They really studied it to look for gaps and look for stories and look for things that they could really go back and get curious about and dig into. Where were they seeing patterns and where were they seeing things they didn't expect, and really getting a better understanding. Through this process, in a very short period of time, after about a year, I think they got up to about 75%. Within 2 years, they were up at 85% overall satisfaction by employees. And in case you don't know, that is mind-bogglingly awesome compared to what most federal employees would, how they would rate their satisfaction at their job. And it's not because NASA is cool and it's sexy and all that stuff. They had the same problems and the same dissatisfaction with their average employee that most other agencies had. And so by really digging into the data, using that as a measurement tool, they were able to get the highest ratings of any federal agency, which I think is quite remarkable. I mean, it's really, really fascinating that they were able to do something that great. So they focused on, and some of the key things that came out of that study was that they needed to look at balance over burnout. They noticed that because the mission is so intense, because they have such incredible maybe danger or intensity with what they're trying to do. Okay, no offense to the DMV, but they're not a DMV where they're not somebody at a government office who's processing whether or not you can drive. They're dealing with rocket ships and things that can explode and exploration to space. That actually caused them to have big burnout rates because people would overwork, not turn off, and they were so dedicated to what they were doing that they lacked the balance. We've seen this in high-performing companies a lot, that there's something great going on, but then their great employees burn out because they just don't know how to balance that and to stop. They also had to think globally but act locally. Now, what that means is they had to think about how to design the company, again, for everybody. Think about the big picture. But then they really had to do sort of the train the trainer, where they had to help the specific managers, the specific leaders get really good at helping their team of people so that the impact didn't come from the larger organization designed it, and then it was your manager that was really helping drive the change or drive the new behaviors or helping you with burnout, whatever it may be. It wasn't Brady doing it at the HR level. It was your manager actually doing it. And then they had to, the final thing, sort of remove this programming. I mean, back in the 50s and 60s, they had this failure is not an option philosophy in NASA. And that's a pretty important thing when you're putting somebody in a rocket full of all that fuel and sending them up into space. Right? We don't want to have failure there. But for the rest of the organization, to be afraid of failing is really a problem. And dealing with mistakes is one of my other pillars, and we're not going to dive into that today, but they had to identify that people were afraid to make a mistake. There was such an intensity around failure that it was causing people to not really be honest about what was happening, to not really raise their hand when they were seeing things that weren't going right. And they had to change that inside the organization to have a much better outcome. Okay. The next one we have is uniqueness. So this pillar, uniqueness, we used a brand new case study. I keep saying we. It's just me. I'm so used to thinking about my team. But I went in and did a case study with Neiman Marcus, Eric Severson. He is the chief people officer. He was with Gap. He was with Vita. Those are other big giant companies you probably know. But now he's with Neiman Marcus, and he's done some pretty amazing things with them. And really looking. So uniqueness is the pillar that says, do we celebrate? Do we look at? Do we leverage? Do we know and understand what makes us unique as a company? What makes us unique as a brand? What makes our employees unique? What makes our customers unique, our vendors, and everybody else in the ecosystem, so that we can celebrate that uniqueness, leverage that uniqueness, and not try to make everybody the same, not trying to hire the same kind of people over and over again, and not trying to be the same over and over, but instead celebrating what makes us unique. So what Neiman Marcus really looked at is how to create an inclusive culture. That was the way in which they really exemplified this uniqueness pillar. And this uniqueness pillar is really the way, it was sort of my way to channel, to dip into the DE&I conversation, which is very complex and very, at times, can be very difficult. But there are some really positive and great ways to do this. And they found that they had to have bias interrupters. What that means is they were clear in understanding that we all have biases. And we're not expecting people to be perfect. And we're not expecting people to go to some 5-hour seminar and come back and have no biases and be totally perfect now going forward. That is not realistic. We all have biases, and over the bit of time, they're going to get in our way. They're going to interfere with our work. They're going to kind of mess up what we're trying to do in creating that inclusive culture. And so we need to have interrupters. And those interrupters included things like making sure the team that was hiring was already diverse, making sure that they were putting in things in place to ensure they were getting those kind of candidates in the door. And again, so sort of interrupting some of those biases. Then they really worked on belonging. So they wanted to look at, how do we make people feel like they belong to the organization? How do they feel like they belong to Neiman Marcus? And that gets back to that first question I asked you, right? Is this a place where no matter who you are, you're going to feel like you belong and you're welcome here and you can thrive and do a great job? And we want to reduce that us versus them mentality. This is very natural for us. This is, again, one of our human biases, to want to get with a group and it's us versus them, because there's some safety in grouping up with people that are like us, that think like us, that do like us, that live where we live, or, voted the way we voted or whatever, because there's some safety in that. In an organization, that's actually counter to what we want to do, and ends up destroying culture and creating too many subcultures. So we want to have uh, this remove the us versus them and make it more about belonging. And so the way in which they sort of phrased that and worded that was making culture work for everyone. One size fits all. And I loved that they took this term, one size fits all, being a luxury clothing and retail store. It makes it, that was clever. So the one size fits all is really great. And it's aspirational, right? I mean, the chances of them getting to 100%, that every employee over their vast amount of stores around the world, they all 100% feel that way, may never happen. But it's that they're trying to get there every day to create that inclusive culture so that people love their job. So those are the three big case studies that I thought would be important for everyone to kind of be exposed to today. Now, you might say, great, Chris, that's cool. I would love to do that. I would like my company right now to take that on. How in the heck do we make it happen? How do we actually do it? Well, that's where I think the work is the most satisfying for me, because I believe in the power of company culture. But I also believe that we have to have real tactical things. We have to have real systems and real exercises or plans, that design part to really make things happen. It is not enough for us to say we want to do something or to believe we should do something. We have to actually design it to happen. And so I'm going to give you a few things to think about before we're done here, so that maybe you'll be able to make it happen back in your organization. The first one is to understand the relationship between information and engagement. So this is my little chart for any of you that are more analytical, that didn't care about the nice little pictures I had. If you like a good old chart, here's your chart. So assuming you have a good idea, assuming it's a good idea, because if it's not a good idea, this will not work. But if it's a good idea, the more somebody understands something, the more likely they are to be engaged along that axis there. So let me say that a different way. If you don't understand at all, you probably will oppose whatever it is I'm asking to do. If I opened up a door and there's a dark room in there and you can't see anything, and I say, hey, can you come in this room with me? You don't know me, the room is dark, you don't know what's in there, you should say no, right? Because you don't know. But if I explain, hey, I can't find the light switch, can you help me? Hi, I'm Chris, I need to find this thing, somebody needs this, can you help me? Suddenly, if you have more information, you might be willing to say yes to the thing I'm asking you to do. It's the same thing every day at work. And yet I find leaders over and over and over again fail to provide enough information to their people to actually get real engagement. So you have to actually get someone to even accept what it is you're telling them, to get even passive support. That's a lot, right? So if they're just know a little bit, they're just going to be aware of it. They're going to be a little indifferent. Just to even accept what you're telling them, they need to understand quite a bit. Then if you really want them to engage, to actually start to do something, they have to really comprehend why it is that you want them to do the thing that you want them to do. And if they have deep insight, if they really understand why this is important, they will be a champion for you. They will tell other people, they'll train other people, they'll go out and advocate to other people for you. And that's what you need. Not everyone can have deep insight on every single thing. But if you really want to get the ball moving, again, remember, we talked about that flip phone crowd, that slow group, the people in the middle. They usually don't have enough information. And so they are wildly scared and they will just oppose. And remember, if this is not a good idea, if you're asking your people to do something that is not a good idea, they will resist no matter how much you inform them, no matter how much you talk to them, no matter how much you train them or tell them. I often make the joke, If I told everyone, hey, let's go make drugs in the basement and we can sell, drugs, and here's how much money we'll make, and I can explain all the reasons why selling drugs might be a good idea, you should resist that idea. That's a terrible idea. That is illegal and a very terrible idea. And so, no matter how much I might try to convince you, a reasonable average person will continue to oppose that idea. And that's a bit of a obtuse example, but you have to understand if your idea is not good and you're getting that resistance and you're really really helping them understand and they're still resisting, you need to go back and rethink your idea or whatever it is you're trying to do. But if the idea is sound, it's good. They just need more information, and that's really really key. Okay, whoops. The last thing I wanted to make sure that everyone understood before we wrap up here, Google X has this really cool way of thinking about whether or not to do something. And I thought I would share it with you today. They have this test called the monkey or the pedestal. And essentially what this is there's this crazy idea that if you get a monkey to recite Shakespeare while sitting on a pedestal. That's a pretty hard thing to do, right? Can you get a monkey to recite Shakespeare while sitting on a pedestal? What we notice in organizations, we say, can we do this really big, hard thing, this maybe never been done before? And what happens is that people start doing all this work around this really big thing that doesn't matter. So in this example from Google, people start making pedestals. They start going around and making all these pedestals to prepare for the eventual monkey to recite Shakespeare. But of course, as we know, there's no monkey coming to ever recite Shakespeare. I mean, it hasn't happened yet. Maybe one day we will have a talking monkey, but as of today, it hasn't happened. So if you can't solve the big problem first, if you can't get that done, if you can't figure out how to get that monkey to recite Shakespeare, there is no reason to start making pedestals. We don't need to do all that busy work. So when we have a new initiative, a new big thing that we're trying to do at our company, you got to tackle the biggest thing first. If that can't be solved, we don't need to do all that other waste, all those other things just to make ourselves feel like we were active or we were doing something. It's really, really important. Okay, I hope that you'll consider checking out my new book, The Power of Company Culture. It's available wherever you buy your books, online, Amazon, Bowl, wherever it is. If you want to follow me on TikTok or Instagram, there's a little QR code there. You can take a shot of that right now, and love to have you engage with me there. Or good old-fashioned LinkedIn. You can go there as well, and love to have you connect with me. If you would like a copy of this presentation, my email's there. You can reach out to me. I'm happy to send you a copy. And I really appreciate Matt inviting me to be here and everything that's going on at Inspiring Workplaces. You guys do amazing work. And I think I'm right on the dot. I think. So I'll back to you all, and thanks for having me.